Thanks everyone for joining us tonight. We're just going to get started in just a few minutes.
Hey, Abuna, can you hear me?
All right, we are good to go here.
All right. How are you, Abuna?
Good to go here. If we could just get
All
some
right.
confirmation.
How are you, Abuna?
Good. How are you, Buna? How are you doing? Good to go here. If we could just get some. Good. How are
I
you?
think we're live here. I'm looking at us on our iPad, so I think we are live, if I'm not mistaken. So good evening to everyone. How's everyone doing out there? It's good to see you guys again. Good to see you, Father Timothy. We just saying hello to each other as well. For those who are just tuning in here, what we're doing is on Thursday nights for a book club. And the last couple of weeks, we did the book, The Way of the Pilgrim. We finished that discussion on prayer a couple of weeks ago. And tonight we're going to be beginning a discussion about a book that, I'll be honest, I struggled with. It wasn't as easy as I read it many years before, but somehow I think I was smarter back then. So Father Timothy, we're looking for you to help drive some of these points home right here. But we'll say hello first to all the people who are joining us. You can write in your name in the chat. That way, you know, we're connecting with each other. So I see Marin from Calgary. Welcome, Marin. Sherry from Springfield. Good to see you, Sherry. Joyce from Alexandria. All right, more locals. Daniel from Durham. Sammy from local as well. Hello to you, Sammy. Chris Gregus from Pittsburgh. All right. Chris and I were chatting about the book. Glad you were able to make it. And Sammy says he's from Vienna. All right, very good. Okay, if anyone else wants to put their name in the chat, we'd love to see who it is that's on here. I see Rasha from Fairfax. Good to see you, Rasha. Mary from Jersey. All right, great to have all you guys. Peter from Herndon. All right. Love to see the locals represented here. Okay. And of course, I am Father Anthony from Annandale, and with me is
Father Timothy from Springfield as well.
uh I don't think we heard you, Father Timothy. I think you're on mute. Or is
Uh,
it just me that didn't hear him? Oh, it's just me. Hold on. Say again. Say again, Abuna.
can everyone hear me?
Yeah, I can. I was on mute. My bad. That was my bad.
Got a little worried there.
My bad. That's my bad. We're still working out the kinks right here. Okay.
Perfect.
Okay, and a couple other people joined here. Miriam from Toronto. You have Christine, and Sherry says we can hear you both. Okay, my bad. Okay, Abuna, why don't you start us off on this book club here tonight?
Yeah, so I absolutely love this book. I hope everyone got it's really a treat. And the way we split up the book, just to kind of give you guys an idea, the first half of the book, the books 1 and 2, is really the philosophical part of it. And then the other half is more about kind of like Christian doctrine and spirituality. So if you struggled a little bit in the first half of the book, that's okay. You can just stick with it. But I've read this book multiple times. So for me at this point, the book, I've gotten a little bit more used to it. And what I will say about this book, and he even says it as the author, he says, if there are certain things in the book that don't necessarily make sense to you, or you kind of struggle with initially to understand, keep moving. Just keep moving, because some parts will make sense. And to be honest, I'll just kind of a little tip here. That's kind of my philosophy for how I read all books. Is there's a lot of times where you're reading stuff and you don't get it. Doesn't mean the book is bad. It just means, you know what, I don't get this right now. Let's keep going. With that being said, I struggled to pick a few things, to be honest, because I love this book. But I'm going to start early on, to kind of give us a backdrop of the book. This book actually was written in the middle of World War II. And the reason that that's important is he actually, C.S. Lewis, fought in World War I. And part of his unbelief and problem with faith really came during those times where he saw a lot of evil in the world. And he couldn't reconcile evil and a just God, a loving God. So that's where the book stems from. So now it's World War II, and he's on the front lines for Christianity, proclaiming his faith. So that's really important to kind of understanding and get the background here a little bit. So right off the bat, in page 8, he talks about that human beings are generally aware of the moral law. And he says for sure there's different understandings of different societies of what that moral law is and specifics, but there is an innate thing in us that tells us something is right and wrong. Now, he makes a distinction between like what our instincts are and the moral law. So like my instincts could be to protect myself, but the moral law tells me don't be selfish. And he gives a lot of different examples of the moral law of like, somebody's drowning. My instinct is protect myself, but the moral law tells me I have to help my fellow brother who's drowning. So he gives a lot of examples like that. The reason I like that a lot is it's kind of what we talked about at the well. This idea that the moral law is something that's embedded in us, like that conscience that we have. People can pervert it, certainly, but generally speaking, 99% of the time, the reason we have that in us is not because we are, superhuman. It's because God created us in his image. And I love that so much because that is his premise for later on for why he believes in a just God, is because we are created in God's image. And therefore, this idea of a moral law or a conscience, that provides the ability for humans to seek fairness and to seek justice in the world. So that I thought that was a really powerful point that he makes really early on to kind of get the conversation started.
Yeah, I mean, he makes a big deal out of the moral law. And like I said, I didn't understand everything that he wrote, but I jotted down a couple things. One of the things that he said about that moral law, he said, you can learn more about God from the moral law and understanding the moral law within us than from seeing his work in creation. So he said, like, basically, you can look at creation and see that God is, God of order, creative God, et cetera, et cetera. But you can learn a lot more about God from studying like who we are on the inside, which I like that way of, I never kind of put it together that way. And he gave the example. He said, just as you can find out more about a man by listening to him than looking at a house that he built. I like that example because I never thought about it that way. Is that when you look at the creation, you see the work of God for sure, and you can understand a lot of things. But yeah, looking at my house, I mean, you could learn about me. You could learn some, like, my walls are plain. You know what I mean? Like we have pretty simple, but by having a conversation with me, and I think his point there was that when we look at who we are on the inside, we're kind of having a conversation with God because God is telling us about himself through how he created us.
For sure.
Does that sound about right?
Feel free to comment in the chat. For those who started reading the book, I agree 1,000%. I think he makes a big deal about this idea of a moral law or a conscience because exactly like you said, Abuna, his whole thing is the reason that we are so against injustice and the reason that we're so against unfairness is because God put that inside of us. We're made in his image. And that's how we can learn about God the most, despite the craziness that's in the world. And that's such a relevant message today. And like I said, he's writing in the middle of World War II. So he's not like writing it, in a peaceful time by any means. This is a time when people are questioning faith. So he's, putting that on the front line. And he even actually makes war analogies. He says if there's no such thing as right and wrong, then what was the big fuss about with the Nazis? What were we, were we in the right or were they in the right? If there's no right or wrong, if it's all just a matter of perspective.
Yeah. If anyone wants to add into our discussion, please feel free to put a comment. We're both monitoring it right there. But on that point, or a question, you can ask a question and we'll do our best to answer. On that point, one of the things that he said also is that when it comes to morality, we can judge better and worse. And he said, and I didn't realize that he was writing, I knew he was around the time of World War, but now that you say that, it makes sense. He's basically saying, like, we can say objectively that our morality is better than the Nazis. Like, he made that specific point. And our morality, like the savages in the olden days had their own morality and the whatever. And he said, I think I wrote it down. I just wrote down the general concept. He's basically saying that there's an absolute when it comes to morality. And we can objectively say and absolutely say that morality, going back to the morality of the first century or the, prehistoric times or, BC, whatever, is a step back, and going where we are now is a step forward. So again, this idea that there is an objective, there's an absolute just, and there's an absolute good, which comes obviously from God. So yeah. Anyone want to add any comments on that particular point? Please feel free. We'd love to hear what your thoughts are. We're trying to make this interactive and a discussion, not just us speaking, but we got plenty of stuff to keep talking about. It's kind of what we do. So if you got a question, throw it up there. I'll share another one of the lessons that I took away from this, not necessarily about the moral law, kind of shift gears. It's actually something he wrote in the prologue or the introduction or whatever it is, which I actually loved. That was actually that was very insightful for me. He said, he basically said the book is called Mere Christianity because he's basically saying, I'm not talking about denominations. So I'm not talking about, Lutheran or Baptist or Catholic. I don't know if he mentioned, I think he mentioned Orthodox. I can't remember. Maybe there's another book.
I don't remember in this specific part if he does or not.
Okay. Maybe it's just in my head. So I'm just writing Mere Christianity. I'm not trying to get into the differences. And then he said something really nice. And this is coming from a former atheist. So I think we should take heed when he says this. He said that the divisions among Christians should only be discussed in the presence of Christians, and never in the presence of non-Christians. And I could not agree more with that.
1,000%.
I could not agree more with that. In my family, we may have issues with each other. Okay, we may fight with each other. We don't discuss it in front of other people. We discuss it amongst ourselves and we get it all out. And I'm all for that discussion. But his point is that there's certain things that are appropriate and not appropriate. And it always, like, one of my pet peeves is Christians who talk bad about other Christians in front of non-Christians, because doing so hurts everybody's cause. And in the end, what he said, unbelievers shouldn't know our differences. Okay. And I'll just throw a little plug out there, a little rant about the stuff that I see online sometimes. I'm like, what's the point of going online and publicly saying that one group of Christians hates another group of Christians? I don't understand the point of that. Like, how is anybody benefited from that by saying I just don't see how that's productive. Going to a person and having a conversation, that's productive. Discussing it in a civilized and a private way, that's productive. But I oftentimes feel like kind of his point right here is we have to examine ourselves, especially if we're, active online and, kind of in this area. What do I want? Do I want to advance the cause of Christ, or do I just want to make myself look like I'm a defender of the faith? I just think that's an important point, because nobody was ever berated into finding the truth, or shamed into it or criticized into it. So I just think that sometimes, we have the wrong viewpoint there.
For sure, 1,000%. And actually, Katie just read my mind. She said she loved the metaphor of the hallway. And he was basically in that intro part. He's saying, like, if you're standing in a hallway and all these different rooms are different, like, denominations of Christianity, and you're trying to kind of figure out, which room to enter. He talks a lot about, he doesn't get into like the different denominations and different, the differences between them, but he does say to the person as an outsider now, so for sure, the people speaking inside, keep your, your fights inside and have those discussions inside and try to get to a place of unity, because it's discouraging for that person that's outside. But the person outside, just because there's, fights inside, if you're watching this and you're kind of, on the fence or whatever, don't let that be the deterrent to kind of get you on the inside, because that's where you find your relationship with Christ. That's where you find, value in that relationship. I love that hallway metaphor as well. But yeah.
And Peter put on there that he did mention Greek Orthodoxy. I knew it was in there somewhere.
Great.
Thank you, Peter, my fact checker. Thank you, buddy.
I'm sure a lot of you have read the book, because I feel like I plugged it like 50 times leading up to this, or at least started reading it. So feel free to fact check us as we go.
Yeah. We're making this up on the fly anyway.
You're not going to hurt our feelings. We'll be okay. Let's see. Oh, so off the thing about the moral law, I love the next analogy he gives. Kind of the way this book is written is it's logic and it's arguments built on each other. So that's kind of the way to read it. It's actually kind of easier, to be honest, to read it in bulk. Kind of like if you're reading like a Pauline epistle, it's easier to really read Romans in bulk to kind of understand the arguments he's making.
Because that was actually one of my problems. Is I read, the first, however many like sections, and then I left it for a week and came back and I didn't remember, so I had to go back and reread it, because it really builds on itself.
For sure. Yeah, and it's good to reread some of the parts. And when you do that, it actually makes a lot more sense with his analogies. One thing that he talks about as well is this idea of instincts. There is like, and I like this example because I think people sometimes confuse the two, especially if you're talking to like non-believers. They'll say that, there's no such thing as morality, just instincts, the survive, like kind of those survival instincts. And that's where we get our idea of morality. And he says, no, because not one instinct is right all the time. And this in the beginning kind of surprised me. I don't know if you remember that part of where he talked about not all instincts are right all the time. And I was like, well, isn't love like for humanity right all the time? And funny enough, he gives that example where he says, you can think that you're loving humanity, but like, let's say you're like a lawyer, and then you, in order for love of humanity, you try to get people, kind of off of and not put in prison and whatever, but then you forget about justice. So the next thing you know, you're a crooked lawyer because of love of humanity. So it becomes, when you rely on one instinct too much, it's like a distortion of what that's supposed to be. Like it's not really love. And I like that a lot because it goes a lot against what our culture says. Our culture says, do whatever feels right. Whatever's right for you, man. Like you just, do whatever feels right. And he says, no, like that can get you in very dangerous places if you rely solely on your instincts. And sometimes the moral standard will, if there's two instincts fighting against each other, the moral standard sometimes will tell you to listen to the weaker instinct because that's the one that takes courage, and that, that's like doing the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
I like that one as well.
And when he said that, I remember that piece. It connected to The Great Divorce, which he also wrote, which was actually, here as like a play. And I know you went to see it with your wife, and I took my wife to see it too. And that part, which I know you remember because we discussed it, where it was that lady who loved her son so much. And that's like a good instinct to like love your son. But she loved him to the point that it actually kept her out of heaven, because basically it became like a idol worship, or like a, became a blockade for her to love God. Mm-hmm. She couldn't understand, why that was bad. All she could see was, I love my son, I love my son, I love my son, I love my son. And, so I think that was a great point, that any instinct taken to an extreme, okay, it is no good. Okay. There's no such thing as a pure instinct that goes to the nth degree. Like you said, even like loving and trying to do kind for others, if it's without justice, then yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and vice versa, right? Like justice without love, it's just merciless.
Yeah.
So there's all that.
Yeah. What do you guys think in the chat right here? Okay. We'd love to hear from you guys, any questions you have. Love to hear if you read the book, some of your favorite lessons as well.
For sure.
Instead of just hearing us talk about our lessons, we'd love to hear from you guys. I see Sherry wrote, I love that he mentioned in that context the response Christ gave to Peter. What is that to you? You follow me. I guess that was in regards to what we were talking about earlier about the criticizing of the one another. What is that to you? Yeah. Thank you, Sherry, for saying that. What other lessons did you guys get from it? Okay. Your favorite takeaway from the book, or something that struck you, or something that didn't make sense, or comment or question, put it in the chat, and Father Timothy and I would be happy to do our best to answer it. Pro Andrew 55. I didn't actually read. I just love coming here. We love having you too, Andrew. But one of the things about a book club, but that's okay. We'll let it go. Don't worry.
Appreciate your honesty, Andrew. Appreciate your honesty.
Yeah, exactly. We're happy to have you, Pro Andrew 55. Anyone who did read it, okay, and wants to throw something on there, please feel free. If not, did you have any other lessons that you wanted to share?
I have another one. Something he talks about, again, this, and it applies a lot to us today, this idea of good and evil. So he talks about, he gives the analogy of cancer, and I don't remember if you say that, and he says some strong words in there. He basically gives the analogy of how some people, again, struggle with this idea of good and bad, and they say, no, it depends on your perspective, whatever. And he says, well, no, like cancer is evil. Like there's no, like God can use anything for good, certainly, but cancer itself is evil. Like coronavirus, evil. Like there's a lot of things, murders, genocides, evil. There's evil in the world. So what I, kind of take away from that as well is free will allows humanity to do things against the will of God. And sometimes we struggle with this idea. But Abuna, we talk about this in membership group, where we talk about this is God's will. And the humility of God is that he gave us free will that can, in a way, in temporary times while we're on earth, overcome his will, so to speak. I use those words loosely, obviously, but what I mean by that is God's will is that all humanity is just, all humanity is love, all humanity is perfect, okay, in his image. Then free will says sometimes yes, with God's will, sometimes no. And that is essential to when we're talking about Christianity. We have to understand that we can do things against God's will. Just because God is perfect and in control and loving, he's also humble, and he gave us free will. And that's the evil that we see in the world. So I love that analogy as well when he talked about, the cancer and no, like cancer is evil. Don't talk any nonsense about how cancer, no, it depends on your perspective. Like, no, like you're not going to go to a hospital and tell somebody has cancer that, no, it depends on your perspective.
Right. I think that was in the section where he was talking about pantheism versus Christianity. and us who believe in gods who see that, like you said, is that God is good, God is just. There are things that are not good and that are not just, versus the, you know, melting pot of pantheism, which is we're all God and it all kind of melds together in the end. His point, you know, your point too, is that there's good and there's evil. We're not the judge of it. God is the judge, but there's absolutes in that sense. Yeah. Sammy writes on here. Well, first, Marin writes, love the chat. I read book 1. Now it makes sense. Glad that we could be of service to you, Marin. Sammy says, each man is at every moment subjected to several different sets of law, but there's only one of these which he is free to disobey. It's amazing how he emphasizes our freedom/free will. And then he says, that's from chapter 1. I only read 19 pages so far. Yeah, so that was kind of your point, okay, about the free will aspect of it there. I don't remember that specific quote, but yeah, but that absolutely, Sam, you're 100% right. Is that like Abuna said, is that we have that free will, and that's part of the image of God too, is that we wouldn't be in the image of God because God is free. So if we were slaves, then we cannot be in the image of God. A part of being in his image is the ability to choose and to make decisions. So yeah. Great quote here from Marianne Messa. Says, I agree with him about sickness, cancer, but what about people like Abuna Bishoy Camil, not how you spell his name, but that's okay. We'll not do spell checking. That prayed for it. What about people who prayed for it? Abuna, you have any thoughts on that? They always say Abuna Bishoy Camil was a priest who passed away in like the 70s, I think, would pray for cancer.
So I'll be honest, I don't know the background of that, that story of like why he would pray for it. What I will say is not to judge anyone's like, kind of thinking or mentality or whatever. Some people could think that certain bad things in life could draw them closer to God or draw them closer to other people so they can share in their suffering. That doesn't mean that we should seek out suffering. But if God allows that for us to have that suffering, he's like kind of on another level of saying, if God allows me to have the suffering, I'm ready to both unite with God more and unite with people more. But I don't think that we should like seek out suffering or seek out evil, like something that hurts us in that sense. But I don't want to like, I don't know the background of this specifically, to be honest.
Yeah, and Abuna Bishoy Camil, like your point is great, is that there's always exceptions to everything. So he's an example of someone who was a great man of God, and he was a holy man. He and his wife lived as brother and sister. But we wouldn't take that and say that's what we should all strive for. Then we wouldn't have children. Okay, and it's just not the natural order. So certain or hermits, for example, monks live in monasteries, but 1% of them go out and live in caves. But we wouldn't look at that and say we should all go live in caves, because it's kind of like when St. Paul was speaking, I was confused, 1 Corinthians 7 or 11, I'm pretty sure it's 11. 1 Corinthians 11, I'm sorry, 7. 1 Corinthians 7, where he talks about marriage versus celibacy. And he's saying, I'm celibate, and I wish you all were like me, because I think it's the way to go. And he even says, like, when a man has a wife, he's worried about things of the world. When he doesn't have a wife, he's free just to live, which could be taken in a, in that direction. But he basically saying is like, if you're called to marriage, be marriage. If you're called to celibacy, be celibacy. And he even says, like, I'm called to this and I wouldn't want to go there. But if you're called to that, you shouldn't come here. So I would say the same things, that in general, certain people at certain spiritual levels do certain things like that, but we don't take them as necessarily an example for all of us. But like you said, we learn that we accept whatever God gives us. And even we can seek out certain ungood things. Okay, ungood things that we would deem not good, we seek them out in order to grow closer to God. My bad, sorry about
that. All right, there's I think some comments here as well. I think it's amazing. We have great capacity to commit evil in the world, but God gave us the capacity for good and to combat that evil in the world. Yeah, it's a very good point. Somebody said, are we going to read another book, or is this book almost over? So we're going to do the second part next week, which will be book 3. And then we'll see after Holy Week what happens. Not sure what's going to happen after that.
Yeah.
Let's see. Maybe we should read The Problem of Pain after. We'll see. Let's see. All right. So I think, yeah, I think that's all the comments pretty much. And Marianne,
Okay.
you're welcome, Marianne, anytime.
We just got a new one. David says, I struggle with mere Christianity. Oh, it went away. Just did think it just went away on mine. I don't know if it went away on yours.
Yeah, it went away on mine as well.
Okay. Sorry, David. It went away. If you want to put it back up there, we'll be happy to read it, but we didn't get a chance to read it. If anyone else has any comments they'd like to share, again, we kind of shared our lessons from the first couple sections of the book. It is a very interesting read. And it is, like Father Timothy said, the kind of book that the further you get into it, the more it's like, because what C.S. Lewis, I think he's a genius. Okay. I don't know what, like his thinking is on a different plane. He's setting us up. Okay. He's setting us up. So he wants to get to this point, but he goes A and then B and then C and then D, and then you start to see the line he's drawing right there. So it's truly, truly a great book if you didn't get a chance to read it yet. Let's go. Mark Sawyer says, I love this book, and by chance, I'm currently reading it. I love the 3 personal God chapter. It made sense and was practical when I have a hard time explaining it to non-believers. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he again, excellent way of presenting Christianity. And Pro Andrew says, love your sermon. Thank you so much, Pro Andrew. Okay. We are close to our time right here. So if anyone else has any questions or comments, welcome to put them up there on the screen. If not, just as a quick kind of public service announcement, we are here on YouTube now, no more on Periscope. We're on YouTube every Tuesday night, Thursday night, Saturday night, and Sunday morning. And also every weekday at noon, all for different things, okay? Go to stsa.church/online to be able to know the schedule of what we're doing and when we're doing it. But we're always on YouTube on this channel. Easiest way that you can stay in touch is just subscribe to YouTube so you'll get a notification. Every weekday, we're doing prayer at noon for 15 minutes. Okay, Tuesday and Thursday, we're having these kind of discussions and inviting you to join us. Saturday, we're doing midnight praises. Sunday, we're doing the well. Then, of course, we got Holy Week coming up, which is a different thing. We'll talk about that next week. We got a few more comments right here. AB, if that's Antonio Brown, man, welcome. We're happy to have you, AB. It's an honor, sort of. I love the part that says, when you are arguing against him, you are arguing against the very power that makes you able to argue at all. It is like cutting off the branch you are sitting on. I do not remember that particular piece, but that is deep stuff. Did you want to add anything to that one?
I remember that. I love that part too, where he talks about if you struggle with this idea of God being just and God being fair, and is free will worth it? And then he says, well, if you're going to argue against God, well, then you're just arguing against the very person that gives you that power to think that way.
Mm-hmm.
So again, it's building on the different, the different arguments. And that part specifically reminds me of Job, where we kind of just talked about it at the well, where God is going to Job and saying, you're thinking that you can understand everything from your point of view, but you have no idea. Like you can't fathom. But yeah, I love that part too, AB. So
absolutely. Thank you, AB. And when I said we don't know if it's an honor to have you or not, I just meant because we don't know what team you're going to be on, because I wasn't really a Steelers fan or a Patriots fan. That's what I'm saying. Donna, thank you so much, Donna, for your nice words. David Yusuf says, I struggle with mere Christianity and the idea of denominations. Is one denomination right and the other wrong? That was kind of his point right there, is that's not really the point of the book, is to say this is right and this is wrong. Of course, everyone tends to see themselves as right. You know what I mean?
Including him, by the way. But yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But what I like about it, which I believe should be all of our approach, especially, like I said, in public, is let's focus on what unites us together. And let's have discussions to discuss the things that we disagree about, but not rants and kind of public, whatever it may be. So idea of denominations is definitely not a God thing. Okay, God, one church. So yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. We appreciate it. Thank you, Father Timothy, for sharing with us. Like Abuna said, is we'll be here. Mark Swear is saying the part about Jesus being Lord, lunatic, or liar along those lines. We'll get into that next week. we'll get into that next week. Yeah, and actually the next person, Chris, says the same thing. I have a question regarding the idea that Jesus was either, then it went away again. I don't know if it's my thing or your thing, but I think he was asking about that whole Lord, lunatic, or liar.
Yeah.
We'll get into that. That's in the next section, right? Was that in this section?
I think it was in book 2.
Is it book 2? Oh, I didn't get to the end of book 2 then. Okay, then go ahead, address it since it was there.
Yeah. So I think Chris said he realized that it was the same point as Mark's, so that's why he took it back. Yeah, I think that point was very interesting. Basically, what he was saying is, you can't. His whole point was, I don't want you to think that Jesus is just a moral teacher. The problem with thinking that is, if you're really saying that, well, if he's such a great moral teacher and he wasn't God on earth, how could he forgive sins? And clearly he's like crazy, or he's Satan himself trying to deceive people. During his time especially, this was a common saying of, he is that Christ is a moral teacher, but they wouldn't accept him as like the God on earth, the God man himself. So I agree that was a very good point as well.
Mm-hmm. And again, I remember that point from when I read it before, but I guess I didn't get to that piece this time.
I thought it was in book 2, but maybe I just remember it from previously.
I think that the point there, the premise that I remember, is that Jesus can either be Son of God or he has to be a liar or lunatic, because he said that he is the Son of the Father.
Mm-hmm.
So either that's true or not true. If it's true, he's the Son of God. If it's not true, he's a liar. Or he's a lunatic that thinks he's someone that he's not.
Right.
So his point is that a lot of people who want to see Jesus as a rabbi, a good teacher, talk good morals, but he's not God, that's not an option, because he said he's God and he did the acts of God. So either he's crazy or he's a magician and a hoax, or he's who he says he is, which, yeah, very, 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 very powerful stuff right there when you look at it that way. Yeah, that's good stuff there. Good stuff. Thank you for that comment, Chris. Thank you for, Chris, I had another one. Even if we look at victory as a matter of influence, how does influence come into writing a person's own story in history? I know that's a dense question. How does influence come into writing a person's own story in history? I'm not sure I understand the question. Not sure I understand the question, Chris. I'm sorry. If you want to add a clarification, how does influence come into writing a person's own story in history? If you want to add a clarification, I'd be happy to answer it, but I'm hesitate to answer a question I don't really understand. I'm sorry. But hey, think about it, okay? And we will be back next week. We'll build a little suspense right there. There was one piece above it. Victory itself is quite subjective. Again, not sure I understand the question. I'm sorry, my apologies. But hey, let's think about it. And I promise you next week, okay, send me an email with a little more clarification, and I promise you we will address it next week and we'll give our thoughts on it. But for tonight, we are at our time, so we are going to let you all go. But again, thank you so much for tuning in. We appreciate it. Thank you, Father Timothy, for sharing with us. And we will see you all back hopefully on Saturday night and Sunday morning, and also tomorrow at noon for prayer. Okay?
Perfect.
Have a good night, everybody. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks, everyone.